Welcome to the show. I'm Jim Flyzik. During today's show, we will discuss progress being made in cloud computing at the Department of Defense. With me on the show today are Gary Blohm, the Director, Army Architecture Integration Center, the Chief Information Officer of the U.S. Army, David Bennett, the Chief Information Officer at DISA, Frank Konieczny, the Chief Technology Officer, U.S. Air Force, Tim LeMaster, Director of Systems Engineering at Juniper Networks, Ken Kartsen, the Vice President, Federal McAfee, and Pat Tracey, the VP for Homeland Security and Defense, U.S. Public Sector, HP Enterprise Services. Let's get into the topics, folks. Let's start with Dave Bennett over at DISA. Dave, give us tell us a little bit about progress that you're making over at DISA in cloud computing.
Thanks, Jim, for having me. Appreciate it. At DISA, we're doing a variety of things to support the cloud. Most of our capabilities that we're putting out today are cloud-based, so the intent as we develop the solution is to provide that capability globally across the DoD, so not for a particular user, but really a capability that everyone within the Department of Defense can leverage. We're heavily involved in working with the services to migrate local applications and services to the cloud at the core data centers that DISA provides for the Department of Defense. And we're also heavily involved in the consolidation of data centers. So as part of the FDCCI effort to reduce the number of data centers, we're taking a heavy approach and a lot of effort to figure out how to optimize floor space across the department and the core data centers, and working with each of the services to figure out what capabilities we can move to the cloud so that the department at large can take advantage of them.
Yeah, terrific. We've done a number of shows here and with DoD folks, and DISA's progress has come up in a number of times from a number of circles. So you're doing a lot of good stuff over there. Keep that up. Gary Blohm, the director over at Army of the Integration Center. What are you guys doing with cloud? Can you tell us a little bit about your progress there?
So I think we've made a lot of progress over the past couple of years, and a lot of it with our partner at DISA. So, of course, we've talked to you about Defense Enterprise Email a number of times.
Yeah.
We're proud to say that we're done migrating all our users, over almost 1.5 million users, to Enterprise Email. And that's really not about the email. It's really about getting to the identity management, which I think postures us to be ready to move to the cloud and many other areas. I think we've also talked to you about the distributed common ground system Army, and that's where we actually try to take the cloud tactically, which presents problems as you have disconnections at times, but we're moving in that direction. Also with our data center consolidation, it's really posturing us to help figure out what do we really want to move to the cloud at some point in the future. We've already closed 140 data centers to date. We've discovered many along the way in the process.
I bet.
But as we're closing and as we're looking at the applications, that's really posturing us, I think, for the future.
Yes, it's putting you into a position of continuous improvement as you move forward. And I think that email consolidation is significant when you look at the volume there, just the sheer volume. And you're right, once you get that consolidation done, you're set for identity management and then a whole series of things that can follow. Sounds exciting. Ken Kartsen over McAfee. How's McAfee positioning to support some of your customers in this space?
Thank you, Jim. You know, from our perspective, I mean, we look at it from a security perspective, and much to the things that Dave and Gary said about how to do identity and access management and how to do that from a cloud perspective or a remote data center and a consolidated data center. It's how McAfee can make our products, our solutions, more applicable and more extensible to the cloud. All the way from the endpoint, where we can do a better job, and we're a wholly owned subsidiary of Intel. So how we can do a better job, even at the silicon level, of do identity management, all the way up to the cloud, through the gateway, and do that identity and access up into the applications.
Right, so you're looking ahead too towards how this can position you for follow-on strategies and continuous improvement cycles. Frank Konieczny, Chief, welcome back to the show, by the way, CTO over at Air Force. Tell us about some progress that you've been making since we've last talked.
We've had some interesting things happening. We've moving our target baseline right now into a implementation baseline, which would be the platform as a service that we're going to demand everybody be compliant with. That'll let us into a cloud infrastructure much easier than normal, and it'll let us have across-the-board standardization into that cloud structure. We're working with DISA, and Dave didn't mention this, the MilCloud effort, which is really an infrastructure as a service offering that DISA is providing, and we're going to be working with them to figure out how our apps will actually migrate into that MilCloud for the core data centers.
Yeah, it's exciting actually having Air Force, Army, and DISA on the same show here, talking about how everyone's cooperating and working together and all. I mean, you go back a generation or so, and you wouldn't have that same culture kind of environment here. Pat Tracey over at HP. Tell us how you're positioning and making progress and helping your customers move ahead in this space.
So we're seeing our customers move past the technologies of cloud into thinking about how the operating model inside the agency has to change as their applications move into the cloud. And that's a great way for them to begin to develop the people skills that it takes to operate in the cloud and the business processes that it takes to operate in the cloud. And we're seeing them make that move, much with DISA and with DHS's leadership around those kinds of challenges at the big enterprise levels. We're running with many of our customers a series of workshops to help them also figure out what's the roadmap by which they want to move from their distributed computing into a cloud-based process for managing their applications. That's a process by which they, CIO and their customers, internal customers, can work together to get to a way ahead that actually meets their needs and can be accommodated within their budget restrictions.
Very good, Pat. That's an interesting perspective, thinking about the people and the processes associated, because I assume they change quite a bit as you move to a cloud world, as well as maybe when we talk about some challenges, we'll talk about some acquisition things like that that are different within a cloud environment. Tim LeMaster over at Juniper. How's Juniper positioning? What is some of the progress you're making or helping your customers make in this area?
Sure. So I think, most people know that Juniper's a provider of infrastructure solutions. So we're spending a lot of our time trying to optimize our products to enable this cloud infrastructure. So cloud infrastructure relies heavily on virtualization. We're making big investments in our solutions through products like our QFabric and others that allow you to simplify the data center, reduce the number of devices in there, so that as you build out your cloud infrastructure, it's simpler to operate and manage and maintain. And then, of course, orchestration is becoming a big trend in cloud computing, and we've done a lot of work in the open standards community around orchestration and working with through open standards to better orchestrate the systems within the data center for easier operation as well.
Yeah, terrific. That idea of simplifying and standardizing, I think over the years, systems have become so complex and there's so much stuff. I was talking before we began the show, I was talking about just how complicated and how much software is out there and how many systems are out there. Cloud, I guess, does open the opportunity to take a look and simplify and perhaps standardize on what you really need and maybe do away with some things that are no longer necessary. Let's shift then and talk some benefits here. Let's talk about, obviously, going to the cloud. It's a giant trend, so we wouldn't be doing it unless we expect some benefits to come out of it. Let's start this time with Gary Blohm over at U.S. Army. Gary, what's some of the benefits you think you're going to achieve with your cloud strategy?
So I think everything we're doing in IT in the Army, I think across the department, really has to do with effectiveness, security, and efficiency. Efficiency is a big part of what we do, but it still doesn't drive everything in the department. We really need to look at effectiveness. And so I think we look at the cloud as an opportunity to even look at how we process our data differently. Mm-hmm. So we have absolutely a lot of data in the Army, business intelligence, looking across different systems where it's been stovepipe in the past, and how can we take advantage of the data to better assess our readiness, to better assess our financial posture, et cetera. I think it also will help facilitate mobility. Mm-hmm. We need to also train as we fight. So as we look at post-camp and station as a docking station, installation as a docking station, how do we train as we fight in the cloud? Mm-hmm. And finally, being resourceful with our funds. We know that that's definitely something we need to do to help the department move forward in these times.
Yeah, the budget climate doesn't look like it's going to ease anytime soon, so resourceful with funds is a big issue. Frank, how about over at U.S. Air Force? What are some of the benefits you're going to try to achieve or see achieving with the cloud strategy?
Well, first of all, we want to have an increased mission focus. What it means is that the airmen right now are doing IT jobs, and they shouldn't be doing IT jobs. They should be focusing on their true mission of what the Air Force is supposed to be doing. So
very good point.
It will relieve them from doing things that the cloud provider should provide for us. Mm-hmm. Also, there's, of course, increased effectiveness. When we have a cloud infrastructure, we have COOP, we have disaster recovery capabilities, we have capabilities of, as Gary mentioned, doing training, mobile training at the same time. So I think that's going to help us achieve mission faster, because we're basically the tenet is really for everything is to meet mission as effectively as possible. And of course, there's efficiencies. Efficiencies in terms of private cloud infrastructure and for development, it should be faster because I could develop on the cloud infrastructure and test it and then move it effectively into production at the same time. And this will save us money as well as everything else's time to get the mission apps right out there. And of course, there's what we found when we did it at Hill Air Force Base, efficiencies in the number of system administrators that you need to have, because we reduced our system administrators on the Linux side like 250 to 1. So it was as soon as you went to a cloud infrastructure, as we did, went down to a standardized baseline. We have 400 apps running. The system administrators went down to nothingness because it was consistency across the board and it was easy to maintain it.
Wow, that's a remarkable achievement there. Dave Bennett, how about some of the coming out of your cloud strategy at DISA?
So as Frank and Gary both mentioned, reduced cost is a big piece of this. As Frank mentioned, just the reduction in personnel. In moving to enterprise email, because we use a standard platform and a standard architecture across the enterprise supporting the 1.5 million users we have on enterprise email today, we're achieving basically a 200 to 1, 200 systems or OEs to individual system administrators. Oh, wow. Which is a huge increase over what we used to do when we were focused on individual applications, each with a different architectural approach. So standardization is a key piece in terms of reducing those costs. The other piece is the improved security aspects of moving to a standardized approach. As mentioned before, we're offering a capability called MilCloud, which is basically an infrastructure as a service type of capability that is going to have a standard implementation that we'll offer across the department. So if you're needing to host a capability within the enterprise, you can provision that capability on the MilCloud infrastructure, and we know exactly how that environment is going to look, how it's going to work, how the security structure of that is set up so that we can improve the security posture. The other piece is just the improved security posture of the enterprise. As we go to the cloud and tie that in with the JIE efforts and the security focus in JIE with the single security architecture, we're now able to move that security boundary to the enterprise and remove a lot of the independent implementations that are done at the post-camp and station, which are never consistent or constant across the enterprise. So moving that to the cloud, moving that to that JIE construct and that single security architecture, tying that in with the standardized architectural approach for providing the infrastructure really brings it all together. So you save time, you save money, and you have a more secure environment to operate in.
Yeah, terrific. Great answer. Also, I want to drill down a little bit more on security here in just a minute, but it's interesting how you tied that in with the standardization there. Let's go to Tim LeMaster over at Juniper. Tim, what do you see as the benefits that are going to come out of all this cloud stuff?
Sure. Well, one of the areas, in addition to the areas that the rest of the panel has spoken about, with total cost of ownership and resource sharing and that sort of thing, certainly another key focus area of cloud computing is mission agility or business agility in the commercial sense. Good one. And cloud computing really enables that. It enables the infrastructure and the services to respond much more quickly to the needs of the mission. So whereas it may have taken weeks for, from a request to delivery of a service previously before cloud, cloud computing enables or facilitates the ability to deliver that service within days or maybe even hours of when it was initially requested.
Yeah, I actually think you're being generous there with weeks in the past. I remember my days in government. We didn't deliver a whole lot of things in weeks, but I think you're right. Down the road, especially when our kids enter the workforce, I mean, they're used to there's an app for that. I'll download that app and we'll run, boy. And what do you mean? It's going to take time. So I think getting that agility in place, as you phrase it, is important. Pat, Tracey, what do you think are some of the benefits we're going to see coming out of this?
I would echo that our commercial customers are moving to the cloud. Sometimes they start for the IT cost efficiencies, but they really see benefits in terms of business agility, business flexibility, and effectiveness in their business operations. We've recently enabled a medium-sized commercial customer of ours to relocate their headquarters across a pretty big geographical location in 6 months from start to finish of the decision to make that move because they moved into the cloud with us. Right. they were able to make that move also without going through the sort of apps modernization process that agencies typically know they need to get done and won't invest the time or the money in. They were able to get some of the benefits of apps modernization just by moving into the cloud and affecting all of that in under 6 months. We're hoping to be able to capture the tools and techniques we use there and bring those to our government customers as well.
That's another interesting benefit you didn't think about. I guess it depends if you're a private cloud and you own the physical space itself. If you're in the public domain, the movement of everybody else becomes irrelevant because things are available wherever you happen to be. Ken Kartsen, how about McAfee? What do you see as some of the big benefits coming out of all this cloud strategy?
It's difficult not to expand on I think a lot of the things that were already discussed
hard
here.
being last on the question.
Yeah,
You can kind of just say ditto, but
would that count? Honestly, it's all about capabilities. Anything with IT and next generation and where we move to from a technology perspective is usually about capability. It's about increased efficiencies, optimized value, and lower costs, and that's what cloud is about. Offloading that and being able to focus on, like Frank said, your mission critical services and deliveries that you're responsible for, and having somebody else who delivers that service every day and do that for you as your provider. It really is all about gaining those efficiencies and optimization, and then the applicability of being able to standardize across an infrastructure and leverage that, and the scale of that is incredibly impressive.
Yeah, standardization is coming up quite a bit here. It's in terms of one of the key things. Dave talked some about security, but I want to drill down. I want to hear from some of the others, and maybe ask Dave to drill down a little bit more on that security question. When we first started to move to cloud, everybody got all concerned about security. Because it seemed like we were giving up a certain amount of control, and now where service level agreements have to be changed, and is the responsibility now between government and perhaps contractors, how is that divided up on addressing that? So I want to get into all those issues, but before we do, I want to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Gary Blohm from the U.S. Army, Dave Bennett from DISA, Frank Konieczny from U.S. Air Force, Tim LeMaster from Juniper Networks, Ken Kartsen from McAfee, and Pat Tracey from HP Enterprise Services. We're talking defense cloud computing. We talked about some progress benefits. I kind of teed up this security question because security was a big deal when people first started moving to cloud. But I'd like to hear your perspective. Let's start with Frank over the Air Force. How are you addressing the security challenges, or let's say the new model of security that one needs to look at in cloud?
We're kind of addressing it in a very interesting way. We're addressing it from more holistic from both the network and from the data viewpoint. Let's go to data. First of all, the cloud broker is working on a data security model right now that says various NIST controls have to be applied based on the data that you have in that cloud structure. And we're working with them to support that and figuring out what the security controls should be. Same time, we developed a ABAC solution, an attribute-based access control, that we are pushing out that will allow only certain personnel to get access to data based on their attributes, mainly their role, their billet, where they are, et cetera. And that will control how we further structure the data down to a lower level of granularity and access. The third thing is we're looking at what people forget about is that there is a network sitting there that's not only the cloud provider. And what are you going to do in the network? And we've talked now about tagging the applications in the network, actually whitelisting various transaction flows so that even though it's sitting in a cloud infrastructure, only certain locations that the transaction will be allowed to go to nor come from.
Sure.
So we're looking at it from that holistic viewpoint that you just can't say throw stuff in the cloud and it's secure because the data is secure.
Right.
We have the other side, we have the user side, and as well as the network side that we have to support and figure out how that works together with the cloud infrastructure.
Yeah, terrific. Dave Bennett, you already talked a little bit about your infrastructure as a service and your standardization. And we also talked about this email consolidation, which I would guess is going to set up for identity management, which could again address security. But any other comments about security?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I think that's absolutely on target. The identity piece of this is going to be key as we go forward. As we put enterprise email into place, we created identity synchronization service, which is basically identifies all 4.5 million users and their personas that DMDC has within their database. So we have the entire DoD workforce identified from an identity perspective, and we tie that in with their PKI, EDI, PI. So we know exactly who the individuals are, which is a key piece in getting that initial access to capabilities. So that identity and access management, the attribute-based access control that Frank mentioned, are key elements to do that. But in addition to that, one of the key things, though, is moving the security boundaries to the cloud and providing a standard common approach to providing that front-end security that every application and user has to come through is a central part of how we need to do business going forward. Today it's inconsistently applied across the enterprise, and as we move more and more to the cloud and as JIE takes hold and we bring the single security architecture in place and the regional security solutions, et cetera, those become key components to providing that infrastructure and that boundary protection that needs to be there to protect the assets that we have. And I agree totally with Frank in terms of focusing on the data. Data and security of the data is central. We're now looking at data from two perspectives, really. What's the public-facing side of security, as well as those sets of data that we really don't believe should be out in the public arena because of security reasons or PII type of data, things like that. So we're starting to sort of categorize data in terms of what its use, and then how do you associate security with those use patterns so that we apply the appropriate amount of security for the right type of data. And by doing that, it sort of drives us to, we go to commercial cloud offerings, or do we do private cloud offerings, that sort of stuff.
Very good. I did actually taught cybersecurity for 17 years on Saturdays at graduate level at Maryland, and I stressed the importance of focusing on the data as opposed to some of the other things where we're investing a lot of money. And, in my feeling about cloud is that, over the years, we band-aided the approach to security. Something would break, we'd patch it. Something would break, we'd patch it. Find something else, we'd buy a tool. Cloud, I think, gives you a chance to step back and look at it holistically and do away with a lot of those old band-aids that are out there and go to a standardized approach. Gary, what do you think, how about over U.S. Army? What do you see as the security challenges and how are you guys addressing them?
So, Jim, I was very afraid that you were going to ask me this question after Frank and Dave. Just to reiterate a couple of things that Dave said, and then I'll probably reiterate some of the things that Frank said. When we went to enterprise email, and we first did our transition to it, it was a little rough at first. It was rough because we didn't have standard practices, whether security and otherwise, across the network. So we learned a lot from that process about standardization. And as we standardized, we brought the level up and improved the security. So I can only reiterate what Dave has said about the identity management being the key underpinning. As we work through JIE, the Joint Information Environment, we really made security our foundational issues that we wanted to work through, whether it be the single security architecture, identity and access management. And so we're really working on those standards across the board, which I think will do us good service as we go in the future. So it's really been an opportunity. We were scared of cloud at first, but as someone's mentioned, it made us look holistically at the problem. And the second side of it was on the data side. We really need to go to a more data-centric approach as we look at security, securing that data, and who has access to each individual piece of that data. So I think, again, looking at that holistically is going to serve us well into the future.
Yeah, what you said there that's encouraging is, I also had the opinion in the past that security was reactive. We didn't put it first when we were doing something new. We thought about security as an afterthought. The idea of making it proactive and making security the upfront thing you're working on makes a big difference. Ken Kartsen, when I think of McAfee, I think it's a security company. At least that's the way I think about it. I know it's gone through some evolution with the Intel thing and all that. But how are you guys approaching the security in the cloud world?
Absolutely. All we do is security. We are wholly owned by Intel. They are a silicon provider, but we're a software company primarily. Our only focus is security globally. And from a cloud perspective, of course, we have technologies technologies and we look at capabilities like cloud brokerage, identity and access management. But for us, we have two sides of the fence, really. We look at the cloud provider and we look at our customer base. And the government being one of the largest customers we have globally. And there's two pieces. On the cloud provider side, for us, it's a lot about the capabilities, but also the multi-tenancy. Giving them the ability to look at different customers and the traffic that's going to them and how to protect them and what types of protection they require, as well as reporting on that. For our customers, especially in the government, because this is, I think, treated a little bit more delicately than in the commercial sector, the government needs, wants, has to have visibility to the events that happen on their applications. Even if that server, that virtual server is not in their environment, they still need to understand and completely understand and have visibility to any security concerns that may exist. So on that side, not only have we provided the management capabilities to do that, but on the back end, what we've done, and not everybody's going to have McAfee all the time. We can only hope from a McAfee perspective. But what we try to do is integrate different security technologies and have a security connected strategy where different security technologies work together, even if they're not our own. And we've worked for the last 5 years on all these APIs so that our customers can have better visibility to the security technologies that they've acquired, McAfee or not McAfee. You know, what we've realized and what we've come out with is a back-end data exchange layer so that we have a common data form so that we can share information. Our cloud provider can share information across systems. Our customers can share information with other security vendors and have that holistic view that was mentioned of the world. And the last thing that we've had a big primary focus on is from a security perspective and cloud and our thoughts around attacks and compromises going from system to system. I mean, we used to see viruses go global in hours. It can be seconds in a cloud environment, leaping from virtual server to virtual server. And how do we see that indicator of compromise? How do we respond to that indicator of compromise? And we've come out with technologies like EPO real-time that will enable you to look at every server you have in your infrastructure, every endpoint you have in your infrastructure, and have a response from each of those in real time in 15 seconds or less. So you know what you're looking for, and you can put steps in place to stop it.
Yeah, I think that idea of being able to interoperate is so important with all the standardization we're talking about here. I think that's a key. And you're right. I've said a number of times on this show that we're moving, in my opinion, to a world where time decision making is going to begin to approach zero in terms of the amount of time you have to make decisions and how fast things can happen. Pat, how about from your perspective? How is HP addressing that security in the cloud issue?
So let me agree with Dave that you start with infrastructure security as built into the core, and being in a cloud environment lets you do that just as a natural part of the environment that you're in. But 70% of the breaches actually occur in applications, and less than 10% of the spend is on securing applications. So pulling applications into a cloud environment allows a CIO to exercise perhaps more even diligence around the security of the applications that his users may be using in their environment and introducing risk. I think the third piece, partnering with McAfee and others, is the ability to translate the continuous monitoring output that will come from the cloud into risk-based decision-making, so the CIO can draw in his users into that decision-making around what risks to accept. This is particularly critical in military organizations where the field commander needs to be able to incorporate cyber into his domain considerations. It's another enabler for him. It's a critical enabler for him, and he should have control of the risk that he's accepting in that domain just as he does in the air, sea, and land domains of a campaign.
Yeah, terrific. I like you bringing up the continuous monitoring topic. Obviously, it's a hot topic, and before we go to Tim at Juniper, on that continuous monitoring, there's a lot of emphasis I see on continuously monitoring data and applications, continuously monitoring the perimeter. But there's also the infrastructure out there, the continuous monitoring of the devices in the network, such as Juniper-type devices. How is Juniper addressing some of those security challenges and security of devices in the network?
Well, thanks, Jim. Yeah, I think cloud computing requires us to move beyond that perimeter security approach. So even for the network infrastructure devices, really security has to be addressed at all levels, both a virtual and a physical level security approach. And it requires not just security, but the visibility that a couple of people in the panel have brought up previously as well, to achieve that role-based access control and the continuous monitoring that we all know is necessary within the cloud to provide good security services, you have to have the visibility. And Juniper has been focused, for example, in an area around network access control, or NAC, which is one of the key enablers typically for role-based access control. Once you have the visibility, you need to make some decisions about who do you allow access to the data, and to what data do you allow them access. And so we've introduced capabilities, again, standards-based, and that's always a key that you hear from Juniper, a theme that you hear from Juniper. We tend to leverage open standards like TNC, the Trusted Network Connect model, and IF-MAP to facilitate a publish and subscribe model for network access control, so that I can learn what every other vendor or device is doing within the infrastructure, publish that, and then other systems can subscribe to that data to help them make decisions about what they're going to have access to, and who they allow access to that data.
Yeah, very good.
Can I
Sure,
add
absolutely.
something to Pat's comment about
Of course.
applications? It just triggered a thought. We also have to raise the bar in terms of what's acceptable from an IA perspective at the application level. We have this thing in the department called Plan of Objectives and Milestones relative to IA posture. And so we have too many applications and providers who are systematically using POEMs, as they're referred to, as a viable way to reduce risk. Well, POEMs are a piece of paper. Right. They're not a physical act to change the IA infrastructure. So one of the things we're doing, and we've implemented that within our own internal network in the agency, is we're going to zero POEMs.
Okay.
So just by doing that alone, you either fix the problem or you take the system off the network.
Yeah.
And we have to almost get to that level of visibility and focus if we're really going to make a meaningful impact as we do all these other things.
Yeah, very good point there. I mean, in the early days of FISMA, things like that, I had the same argument that FISMA is filling out paper and filling out check-in blocks on paper. That's not security.
Right.
And I won't get into pros and cons of FISMA here because I'll get myself in a whole bunch of trouble. But let's stay right with you, Dave. What are some of the other challenges? We're talking here about security, but what are some of the other big challenges that go in the cloud? I'm going to guess that Army, Navy, and Air Force didn't say, oh yeah, this is just go ahead and do whatever you want to do. I have a feeling there were some issues had to be worked through along the way.
Yeah, well, requirements is always a problem,
right?
Because anytime you provide a joint solution, enterprise solution, everybody has their unique set of requirements, and their requirements are probably more important than the next person's set of requirements. So requirements is always an issue that we have to work through collectively. The other piece is most of the capabilities we're focusing on providing right now, such as the mobility program, unified capability that we're starting work on now, as well as enterprise email and our portal service. Most of those are leveraging commercial technologies, and a lot of those capabilities probably weren't designed for 4.5 million users as one collective offering. So the scalability of enterprise email was something we had to put a lot of focus on and worked quite heavily with Microsoft on at the very outset to make sure that that capability could scale to the level that we needed and be performant at those levels. So that the individual at the desktop at the installation had the same performance as somebody sitting at the Pentagon, as one case in point. The other piece that I'm focused on, since I provide all the data centers as part of the data center consolidation for the agency, is that consolidation of applications and capabilities into the data centers. When you look across DoD and you look at the number of applications that need to be moving to the core data centers, that is a huge undertaking in terms of just sheer volume alone. So figuring out how to bring all of those capabilities in between now and FY18 against the current plan is going to take everybody providing a significant push to make that happen. And we have a lot of momentum moving in that direction today. And then tied with that is that the systems that are out there today are not all optimized and structured to really be enterprise level capabilities. And so as we consolidate these capabilities within the core data centers, a lot of focus needs to be put on optimizing and improving the technical approach so that we can virtualize those capabilities and move them into the infrastructure and on those standardized platforms that we were talking about, i.e. MilCloud.
Yeah, I guess it makes no sense to move things in as is. You want to either modernize or virtualize in the process. Gary Blohm, how about over at Army? What are some of the big challenges that you face in trying to get to your cloud strategy?
Well, thanks, Jim. Well, first of all, I want to just remind Dave. Dave said that everyone's requirements are more important than others. I just want to remind him that my requirements are
Army's
more,
a little bit
most
higher
important.
than you. Yeah. Why do I think Frank might have a different opinion on that one?
We'll talk later. I like to focus on a couple areas. One
Okay.
is as we've been in theater for the last decade, we've let our post-compensation infrastructure atrophy.
Sure.
So we also, something you don't think about sometimes, is we need to build the capacity to allow us to use these cloud services. So we've really put an emphasis, or again, working with our partners at DISA, upgrading the capacity significantly at post-compensation.
Now, are you talking about technology capacities or people capacities or throughput? Okay.
So data rates up to 100 gigabits per second.
Okay.
Tied to the backbone. So we've really put on us here the way we go through the process of showing that as a requirement. We were always a step behind looking, and we know that data rates and bandwidth is always going to increase as time goes on. So we're really getting ahead of that. The second thing, and it ties to what Pat said before about operational models. I was going to use the term business models. Everything we're used to buying, building, acquiring in the Army has always been on a systems level.
Right.
I buy the hardware, I buy the software,
Right.
I do it in my stovepipe. Breaking away from that and letting some of that control go over to others is really a challenge for us. And whether it's government to government with those kinds of SLAs, and we've been working through that with DISA and improving significantly, or how do we work with commercial providers to provide as a service? So we're really working and focusing on that acquisition piece of doing this, whether it's going to a government partner or out to industry.
Yeah, I think the acquisition challenges are there, and I mean it's a little different model, and that causes some challenges. Frank, how about over the Air Force? What are some of the challenges you face every day here in trying to get to where you want to go with your cloud strategy?
Well, let's talk about the acquisition model a little bit more, too. Because
Okay.
as we go to a commercial cloud vendor at some point in time, the question is, do we contract with the cloud vendor itself, and then do we have to contract with another system integrator that will put the application in the cloud? And then how does all the SLAs, who's responsible for those SLAs at the user view endpoint? Because it's a concern that the cloud provider may actually be saying that they're up 98% of the time or 99% of the time, but from the user viewpoint, they may not be there at all. Another aspect is budgeting. How do we budget for a commercial cloud vendor? Because if we know we're going to have surge capabilities, do we have our budget to cover all surge capabilities whatsoever? Which means we may have money back at the end of the year, and what do we do with that money? Right. Congress doesn't like that usually. Yeah. Then there's also, no one wants to talk about the culture.
Right.
Culture is a big deal.
All right, there we go. The 98 show, 98th time culture
It's always
made it to the table of discussion.
It's always culture. The question is, and it's a risk culture in a lot of cases. It's not so much control. Is it there when I need it? If it's a far away place connected on a network, the assumption is always the network always is there. But in many cases, the network is not always there.
Right, right. Yeah, good point. And, I'm not kidding. We've done 98 shows, and when we get to challenges, all 98 shows, someone has mentioned culture challenges and as being a big issue. I want to hear from our industry panelists on the challenges, too. But first, we need to take a short break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. To the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Gary Blohm, Dave Bennett, Gary Blohm from Army, Dave Bennett from DISA, Frank Konieczny from Air Force, Tim LeMaster from Juniper, Ken Kartsen from McAfee, Pat Tracey from HP Enterprise Services. We're talking defense cloud computing. Let's go to Tim LeMaster. We heard from our government panelist here about some of the challenges they face. Tim, what are some of the challenges you face in trying to support the government movement to cloud?
Sure. So I think it was Dave that mentioned scalability, and one of the key advantages of cloud is that to achieve that scalability and that flexibility. So that's something that has to be addressed in the solution, and so we've been doing a lot of work in that area to address how do you scale the provisioning, the operations, and the management of the infrastructure that you're providing this solution on, and again leveraging open standards, trying to take advantage of orchestration systems that are freeware or open standards, as OpenStack or CloudStack, systems like that. We want to allow customers to provision and operate that network in a more simple way so that they can scale it to where it needs to go. And I think a lot of what we want to achieve out of these cloud systems requires a lot more analytics than we have today. There's a lot of data out there, and we've been talking about big data in terms of the user data, but there's a lot of data in the network itself. And being able to collect that data and perform analytics against it is an area that Juniper's been focusing on as well, because we believe it will facilitate better systems and more efficient use of those systems.
Absolutely. You hear that all the time. Ken, Kartsen, what do you think is some of the big challenges you're bumping into as you support your customers moving into cloud environments?
Yeah, I think, over time what we're going to see is, potentially the proliferation of cloud providers. And, our customers are going to not be thinking about one or two or three major cloud providers that might be in the industry, but they're thinking about, better applications that are commercially available via the cloud, and these cloud providers are everywhere.
Right.
And now you've got that identity and access management problem multiplied out.
Sure.
And that's something we haven't even thought about. We think about it today in some of the smaller commercial enterprises who outsource some of their HR applications to one provider and their expense applications to another provider, and it just goes on and on while you try to simplify this. The other piece of that is the proliferation of devices themselves and having that identity and access management to them. We're not going to be talking about a desktop or a laptop that has to get to 3 or 4 clouds. We're going to talk about an end user who has, hopefully not, but probably 5 or 6 different devices going to 10 or 11 different clouds. And how do you manage all that?
Right. Yeah, you're right too. There's so many companies I haven't even heard of in the past now that are cloud providers, and then you have things like, Amazon used to sell books, and Google used to be just a search engine, and Microsoft just provided some software. Now they're all in the cloud business and so forth. So it's interesting. And talking about that, Pat, what are some of the challenges? I would imagine challenges you see are a lot of these new companies sort of like encroaching in space we're used. We're dominant.
So helping our customers make apples to apples comparisons. There's a wide range of ways in which cloud services are being sold, from a la carte, which appeals to buyers because it appears to be a very, very controllable cost. I can get down to precisely what I want, but my workforce actually has to know exactly what bundle of things to buy for the purpose that they are trying to execute, all the way to it's all up, all in, and that price may look a lot more expensive than the a la carte, and the range of things in between. How do you help an acquirer understand how to make apples to apples comparisons across those varieties of vendor formats that are being offered up to them? Secondly, I think I've talked about this a couple of times, just what is the workforce ready to do in order to operate in the cloud? Is the IT department now going to become the cloud services creator and provider if the service that's been bought is an a la carte service? So unlike the opportunity to move away from airmen doing IT, do we now get them just in a different, and now it's an even more roll up your sleeves IT role? Thirdly, the expectations for savings are frequently reflective of what happens if what you're buying is a vanilla service. If you just want straight stick email service, then the price that's being quoted to you can be great. If, on the other hand, you need to be able to archive huge amounts of information and keep those in perpetuity and access them in perpetuity, that may be a very different price from the one that's being quoted to you. And you may not realize the benefits that you want if you are unable to get your users into more standardized, more vanilla versions of the services that they're looking for. And then lastly, I think someone has talked about the deployed member. How do you make sure that there is access to information for a deployed member if all the information's in the cloud? And we've worked with Army on D6A to come up with some of the technologies that let you actually do that with higher probability than not. And that's, I think, a place where some technology advancements may still be important to progress. One last thing. The users of the information, the owners of the information, have to be participating in the information mapping process that lets you decide what can be in the public cloud and what needs to be in a private cloud and what needs to be off the cloud. And that's getting the users to participate in that kind of governance process is one of the biggest challenges I think that the department will face.
Yeah, very good points. Excellent points there, and there's focus on the people. Well, we're down to the last segment here. We've got about 11 and a half minutes to go. And what we like to do is hear about the future. Where's this all going? What's your vision of where this is going to go down the road next, say, 5 years or so? How will the government change? What should we expect for the American people and services to the American people? Let's start and work our way right down. Let's go to Tim LeMaster. Tim, what's your minute and a half version of the future?
All right, I'll try to give it to you. Looking at my crystal ball here while Pat was talking. No, I think we'll begin to realize some of that lower total cost of ownership and business agility that SDN and some of those kind of technologies have been promising for a while now. And so I think we will see SDN begin to roll out. We will see solutions such as network functions virtualization, or NFV, sometimes called, begin to be deployed, and we'll see services being moved off of black box appliances, services that the network has offered traditionally as things like load balancing or session border controlling and IDP and things like that. Sure. Will move off of physical appliances and move into an x86 kind of architecture and be able to be provisioned dynamically as the need, as the mission requires. Sure. So that's the kind of the future that I think we'll see.
Yeah, kind of like the kids are going to expect. Pat, Tracey, what do you see? What's the future look like for you? Where's this all going?
So I think the move to the cloud is inevitable. That's happening. It will be probably a hybrid environment, not a single style of provisioning. I think people will move way past what the economic benefits are of being in the cloud and really start to look at the ways in which decision-making can be enhanced, collaboration can be enhanced, where we can react to the fact that the decision timeline is much thinner than it ever was, but the requirement to understand second and third order effects of decisions will be even bigger than it's been, and the ability to really use big data in ways that make better decisions faster will be a benefit that people focus on.
Terrific. Very well put. Frank Konieczny, what's it look like, Frank, from your perspective? Where's this going?
Okay, and in 5 years, we expect to have multiple cloud providers across the board.
Okay.
These cloud providers are probably providing not only processing, but also data storage, large data object storage, because we have that problem right now, that we get more data than we could possibly store. The analytics will be very important when we do that, because then on top of the large data object stores, we're going to have to run a lot of analytics.
Sure.
And the concept is to get to a more automated viewpoint of what we have to actually go through when we go through those large data objects, how to effectively transform them into some real information that we could utilize in the mission. For the airmen, I don't know, Pat, but I don't believe that they're going to want to do less IT than they're doing right now and focus more on the mission capabilities. And we've got to make sure that that happens, as opposed to having them do another role which is more onerous than what they're doing now, but doesn't help the mission.
Yeah, very well put, very well put. King Kartsen over McAfee, what's your crystal ball look like? Where's this all going? What's the strategy down the road?
Well, hopefully it takes us back to where we started the conversation about why we're doing this.
Okay.
You know, and hopefully that'll bring us simplification across our environments, across our networks, across our applications, and it'll give us better availability and efficiencies. Going back to the last question before that, when we talk about some of the concerns moving in that direction, one of the things that is always of a concern is new and future requirements. As we don't own the actual infrastructure, but we have new requirements thrust upon us, how do we enforce those with our cloud provider? CDM, Pat brought up, is an excellent example. It's just rolling out today. How is CDM going to look in 3 or 4 years? How are you going to leverage and utilize those requirements against your cloud provider when you don't know the requirements today and you're releasing your cloud RFP, for example? So how do we overcome that? But once we do, you do have that simplification, and you have it across entire massive enterprises. Mm-hmm. So you can gain incredible efficiencies. And for the end user, it's really about, I want to be able to turn it on, and I want it to work.
Yeah.
That's it.
Absolutely.
You know, I don't want to see a command line pop up because something's wrong, or this device doesn't look like that device and I got to learn another user interface, and it has to be very usable. And I think we're going that way, and I think we'll get there.
I agree. Good point. Very good point. So Gary Blohm, what do you see as the future? Where's this going? What do you project out?
So I think what gets us excited in the Army is we're seeing a change in how we're behaving as an enterprise, where we didn't talk that way before. And so as you go about and talk to folks who used to have control of their own piece of the network, they are starting to look at, how do I get to an enterprise? How do I do this for a total Army win? So I think over the next couple of years, where we're going to see our focus is, we're going to continue to really work hard at our data center consolidation. We had a goal of 185 by 15. We're going to meet that. We're going to do that even faster. But because of what we found, we have a new goal of closing 533 by FY88. That's a lot of work.
That's impressive.
That's a lot of work to do. You're going to see us looking, as we build on our success with enterprise email, looking at services. So unified capability and content management are the two next areas you're going to see a focus, and we're going to partner again with DISA to try to come up with an enterprise approach to doing that. And finally, to get back to something General Brenler said on one of your previous shows, I really like the way he said it, and making it simple. He would talk, we always drew clouds on PowerPoint.
Right.
But now we're saying, we got this. You know, you guys don't worry about this. We're going to make this simple for you to use.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's where the term cloud came from, because we used to always draw these things, you know, and call it the internet and the stuff in the middle, and someone said it looked like a cloud. I think that's where the name came from. Well said, Gary. Appreciate that. David Bennett, what's the future look like from the DISA point of view, or your point of view in leading DISA into this cloud world?
Yeah, I'm going to come at it from a couple of perspectives, because we both provide commercial or provide capabilities from the cloud, as well as we are consumers of cloud capabilities.
Sure.
So I think from a provider perspective, I think you're going to see us focus more and more on leveraging commercial capabilities that are out there in the industry today, as opposed to defining and developing our own solutions. But what are the commercial products that get us close enough to the end goal that we can leverage, as opposed to build from scratch? I agree, the cloud is here. The question is going to become, how do we leverage the cloud? Do we use a public cloud? Do we use a private cloud? Do we use a hybrid? I think time will tell.
Right.
And I think going back to the data discussion, that's going to drive a lot of that execution. So as data takes a more central role in terms of how do you secure the data at what levels? Do you go more to an extended DoD-in infrastructure going out to a commercial offering that's out in a private environment?
Right. And don't you think it'd be an evolution as trust
oh,
is
absolutely.
built? You know, as you move some things and trust is built, then move some more things and so forth.
Trust is a key piece, but I think it's also the idea that we're going to run into an entirely new set of problems that we're going to have to deal with. That as we've gotten to this point, you know, we're now dealing with problems that we didn't have 5 years ago. As we go forward, we're going to have a new set of problems, and that are going to require new policies, new governance, new ways of doing business that we don't know today, that will help drive what that answer is in terms of how do you leverage the cloud, what's the capabilities you put in the cloud. It's just a continuous circle of life. And as we go forward, just to Gary's point, we think unified capabilities is going to be a key piece going forward, being able to leverage the voice, the video, the infrastructure that's there, as well as what capabilities can end user leverage at the desktop via presence and other things like that, collaboration. The capabilities are really endless when you start to get to that unified approach to looking at those things. But the other thing I think is with JIE coming down the path, one of the things that we're going to start to see is a melding of what in the past have sort of been segregated, and those are sort of what's the operational view of IT,
Right.
What's the security view of IT, and then what's the technology view of IT, and then there's actually the fourth, which is the end user perspective.
Right.
And GIE, I think, starts to smash a lot of that together, so that now how are the operators working with the providers, working with the technology in more of a combined approach that is going to change a lot of things in terms of how we've offered capabilities in the past.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. I like your circle of life concept there. I mean, if you go back in follow the sort of the pendulum swinging here. There's a time back in the, I guess, the 70s where we're going to use time sharing and move everything out. Then we pulled everything back. Then we went to user computing. Now we're coming back to cloud. It's an interesting circle of life, as the way you put it. Let me do some quick summaries here. As you were talking, I jotted down some points. And what I heard on progress is there's a definitely higher percentage of things going to cloud. Cloud is here to stay. More and more is moving that direction. I also heard standardization and simplification as being two major areas that we're making progress in and will make things easier in the future. When we talked about benefits, we obviously have the efficiency, effectiveness, and the ultimate thing is, of course, reducing cost. But I also heard a lot about agility and the ability to move quicker, get things out faster, improve security that comes by the fact that you take that holistic approach. And we heard about identity management being a key piece. If you can get things to the cloud and you can get the identity management nailed, then a lot of other things can grow from that baseline. Challenges, scaling, obviously the amount of data, big data, scaling that data, storing that data, analyzing that data, consolidating applications. The sheer volume of applications that need to be consolidated will be challenges. And we want to virtualize and modernize before we move to cloud. We don't want to move old stuff into new environments. Acquisition and budgeting, I heard, of being two challenges because it changes the game a little bit as to how we do that. And Pat brought up a number of time people processes. There are people processes that need to be looked at in that human aspect of it. Future, we see some clearly. The goal is the lower cost of ownership is a goal for the future. And I think that as we get to the standardization and we get to these platforms, and we talked about the things that will enable you all to do in the future, I have a feeling that we haven't even dreamed of what we're going to be able to do in the future once we get to these environments. I think it's going to be an entirely new world. I guess I see it as, we're moving to where, IT will be viewed like a utility is viewed today, and that people, as Frank put out, will focus solely on mission, and the IT will be there to support it, and it just be a given, which creates a challenge for all the CIOs and CTOs around town. I want to first thank my panelists for taking time from their busy schedules to be here today. I know how busy you are. Thanks for being here.